Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Spencer Timmel. I'm head of the cyber insurance at Safety National, a Tokyo Marine Group company. Before we get started, I'd like to thank all of our insureds and all of our brokers attending today. I truly appreciate the partnerships. At Safety National, we're committed to our excess cyber and blended offering. We also truly believe that stability matters in cyber risk. Educating the community is a big part of that mission. So today's webinar is on deepfakes. And my hope for today is that each of you walk away with a better understanding of the risk associated with deepfakes and how you can protect yourself, your organization, and your clients. To me, deepfake technology truly is terrifying. It's a software available pretty much to anyone and many times free. And it is to create realistic audio and video that is fake. We have two great speakers today. I'd like for them to introduce themselves. Jeremy, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, I've been with Safety National for close to 10 years at this point. Been part of the cyber team since its founding in 2017, and previously had experience underwriting tech E&O, but at Safety have helped Spencer build out the cyber practice and product for cyber.
Art, how about yourself?
Great. Thank you, Spencer. Thank you, Jeremy. Looking forward to the conversation today. Thank you all for joining us for this really important conversation about deepfake technology. My name is Hart Brown. I serve as CEO of a company called Future Point of View, where one of the core elements that we focus on is risk and governance over artificial intelligence. And with that, deepfake technology and how artificial intelligence is used is one of those components. So looking forward to actually showing you what that means as part of the presentation today.
All right, so let's just jump straight into it. I mean, today's call, we're really just going to go talk through what's in the news today about deepfakes, the why and the how as it works, the motivations behind it, and why it happens. We're going to do a quick demonstration, both of an audio and a video deepfake, and then kind of how do you identify a deepfake? And then Jeremy will hit on a few of the insurance implications. So Jeremy, why don't we just start with you? What have you seen in the news in the last few months relative to deepfakes?
Yeah, if you've been paying attention this year alone, there's been a lot of talk, a lot of stories coming out surrounding deepfakes. From political side, back in January, there were robocalls going around in New Hampshire, purported to be from President Biden, asking New Hampshire residents to save their votes for November and avoid voting in the New Hampshire primaries. So that's been traced back to a Texas-based company that was utilizing deepfake technology to impersonate President Biden's voice. In a kind of world event side, you have Iran hacked a UAE broadcast and inserted a fake news story that would utilize deepfake technology. They were putting out fake news about the Israel-Hamas conflict still ongoing. And from a celebrity side, I think the NFL learned. My daughters would love. You gotta talk about Taylor Swift any chance you get. So that gets you clicks. But negative side for her, there were inappropriate photos being distributed back in February. Again, utilizing deepfake technology that were distributed that she had to counter. And then again, February, we'll talk about it a bit more later on in the presentation, but a $25 million financial loss, transfer of funds in Hong Kong that was all kicked off because of a deepfake call, similar to what we have going on here. Spooked somebody.
Yeah, I mean, unbelievable, right? All within the last couple of, the first couple of months of 2024. So Hart, why do deepfakes work? Maybe you can go into that for us a bit.
Fantastic. So there's a couple of things to keep in mind on deepfakes. And if we go to the next slide, you'll actually see one of them. So it's based on the human condition. There are two elements that kind of combine to actually start this process. The first is, as human beings, we love sort of gossipy news, something different, something that we haven't seen before. So we're driven to these kinds of sensationalized events and potentially images or videos. The second is based on the way our brain works. So there is something called the vividness bias. Now, here's the way the brain is starting to function, which is Our brain has to try and simplify the world. The world is too complicated for our brain to absorb everything all at once, all of the time. As it starts to simplify what it sees or hears, it's starting to create a very specific element of vividness. And so on the slide, what you see is an example of this. Some of you will look at this slide and see a younger woman. Some of you will look at this slide and see an older woman. Now, interestingly to note, if you're 45 and above, you likely see the older woman. If you're 45 and below, you likely see the younger woman. However, it becomes really hard to switch back and forth between the two. Can you see what the younger woman looks like and what the older woman looks like and go back and forth? If you look away and come back and look at this slide, what do you see? Is it the same first image that you got when you saw it initially? And so that vividness bias simply says the first thing that pops into our brain has a tendency to stick longer and become more vivid to us. We have a tendency to believe that more than anything else. And this is hardwired into our brains from the time that the dinosaurs were running around, and it was important for us to recognize what was going on and taking action. So that vividness bias, what we see first, has a tendency to stick longer and become more vivid to us. Now, there's another piece of all of this in the human condition, and that is the element of lying. And so if we go to the next slide, you'll actually see what I mean by this. We are surrounded by lies all day long, every single day. And we accept that as just part of going on with our daily activities. So the way lying begins at a very early age for us starts at roughly about age 3. And the cookie example is the one I love to use for this. About age 3, an individual or a young person will go and grab cookie and eat the cookie, and there might be crumbs laying around, and an adult goes and asks the young child, "Did you eat a cookie?" And they have chocolate all over their face still, and they say no. So they've learned to lie, but they haven't really learned to get away with it yet. By about age 5, we learn to lie and actually wipe our face to get the chocolate off and make sure we're able to blame the dog or something else. We're starting to realize the value of potentially getting away with something about age 5. By adulthood, roughly age 18 or so, and you can see the next few bullet points, undergraduates, unfortunately for you as parents that may be watching this, but undergraduates, those going to school, they end up lying to their family roughly in 50% of the conversations. They also lie in roughly 80% of the conversations that they may have with strangers. So here's the complexity of this. One is that vividness bias is important for us to recognize. It's hard to unring a bell when it's already been rung in our brains. What we see, we end up believing. And 2, we have a tendency to accept the fact that lies are happening and it doesn't bother us, and we don't question those lies. So we don't push back on what we initially see or hear. So that part of the process on the human side, Spencer, is what has a tendency to become valuable if you're trying to create a deepfake and make it believable and get it out to people.
Yeah, that is very interesting and very basic, right? I mean, that's the fundamentals. So like the next slide there, what we tried to do is we took my voicemail message and Hart, maybe you can give a little bit of commentary on how you did this and how quickly it was done and relative to some of the software that you used and how easy it was.
Yeah, so it's a great first test of how deepfakes work, and talking about this and talking about the risk is let's just focus on audio for a minute. So here's what we did. Spencer was nice enough to be a volunteer as part of this process. And the test really was a complex test. The test itself was, can we grab Spencer's voicemail answering system, his voice in a very short sort of 10-second or so clip? Can we grab that, create a script that has Spencer saying something he never actually, in fact, said? So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to play audio 1 so everybody can hear Spencer's voicemail, and then we're going to come back and I'm going to play audio 2. So Here we go with audio 1.
Hello, this is Spencer Kimmel from Safety National. I hope all is well. Please leave your name, detailed message, and I'll get back to you as soon as possible. Thanks, and have a great day.
Okay, so as you hear that audio, a couple things should resonate with you. One, it's not very long. I can tell you when we're actually doing audio deepfakes, we like to have roughly 1 to 3 minutes of audio to actually try and get tonality. We try and get a little depth of what a person would say or how they would act or what kinds of what sort of inflection they have in their voice, how often they pause or how they say certain words, right? That would 1 to 3 minutes would give us about that amount of time. However, that was about 10 seconds. And if you heard the audio, there's even a little bit of noise in that audio because we're getting it right off the phone. It's probably not a good recording and it's not really that clean. So here's what we could do with about 10 seconds of audio, grabbing Spencer's voice and seeing if we can create something that in fact might be passable if you're trying to do something nefarious. So let's play audio 2.
Hi, my name is Spencer. I'm from over at Safety National. I'm calling because I can't get into my account. Would you mind helping me reset my password?
Okay,
Crazy.
so here's the challenge, right? You listen to voice 1, you listen to voice 2. There's a lot of people that will do voice authentication. There's a lot of different things out there about how can we authenticate somebody or believe that somebody is actually on the other end of the phone. We're seeing these types of attacks, impersonation types of attacks, more and more, especially as it relates to things like calling IT and changing a password. So Spencer, you haven't really heard these audio clips before. Thoughts on what you just heard?
I mean, it's absolutely terrifying to me. I haven't heard it before, and it's shocking. I mean, it really did give me chills. I mean, and I'll tell you, 10 seconds at best of that recording through my iPhone, right? I mean, that's pretty astonishing. So I think maybe you transition now, Art, into when you do have really good quality audio and video. What does that product look like?
Yeah, it is quite a bit better, number one. And number two, you can make longer and longer clips. So the software we were using for this is freely available software. It's not expensive to actually use the software. And in fact, the company is not even one that you would consider to be a sort of a dark web kind of company. The company actually reached $1 billion valuation recently and continues to grow in leveraging these types of tools. So unfortunately, the tool set to use this is readily accessible to a lot of people. The more audio I can get, the longer the audio clips I can actually create, the better they sound overall, the more I can do with them. And we're seeing, unfortunately, a rise in these sort of impersonation attempts because the software is so easy to use.
That's great. So should we? Oh, Jeremy, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think one of the things that's even scarier about this is, I mean, as we've heard in the news, you have MGM and Caesars that both had incidents. Both of those were, I guess, kicked off via a password reset attempt that enabled them into the system. And at least from what's publicly available that we've heard, they didn't even utilize deepfake audio technology to try to impersonate or spoof somebody. Just a simple phone call with knowledge of the individual. So if you would combine those two, that gets really scary.
Yeah, very powerful. So maybe we take it a step further, right? And do we want to show the video deepfake now?
Yeah, as that's getting queued up, just to get a bit of background on this, similar to Spencer providing his audio as he did, or his voicemail for the audio portion of the deepfake. I raised my hand and agreed to provide some video for this deepfake portion of the presentation here. We thought a little bit about making it interesting and doing somebody famous, having Tom Cruise show up, but we thought better of getting sued at the same time. So had to go with somebody a bit less interesting. There's no publicly available video, audio of me out there that I'm aware of. And so I did have to sit down, provide some audio video for Hart and his team to utilize. And what's pretty interesting, as we'll see here, is that it was simply me sitting there for about 10 minutes reading Dr. Seuss books. And I wanted to do that just to see if, you know, something as far as reading words from a kid's book could then be utilized to you know, produce a deep fake of me saying something obviously way completely different than that later on.
There, I do not like them anywhere. I do not like green eggs and ham. I do not like them, Sam, I am. You do not like them, so you say, try them, and you may. Try them, and you may. So here I am being deep faked. In fact, I am Jeremy. Now, how can this be used in real life to deceive somebody? In a case that just occurred in Hong Kong, 5 senior executives of a bank set up a Zoom call with an individual in the Hong Kong branch. Those 5 senior executives of the bank were all, in fact, deep-faked on the call. They then convinced her to conduct not just one wire transfer, but a series of wire transfers over an entire week that resulted in the total loss of about $25.6 million in US terms. It becomes more and more difficult to think of deep fakes when you're on video calls.
You know, the fact that Jeremy's, you know, reading a Dr. Seuss book for 10 minutes with high quality video and audio to produce a deep fake to this extent is pretty amazing. So how easy, Art, is it to create this stuff?
Yeah, it's a great question. So some of the things to keep in mind for video-based deepfakes. In order to do this, what you just saw, we used absolutely free software. If you know where to go and get it, you could go grab software like this. It takes roughly, depending on your computer setup, it takes about 5 or 7 days or so to actually train the model. So what we did is we took Jeremy's audio and video, we fed it into the system, and we started running the video in the system. Now, what it's doing as it's starting to train and think through this process, it's actually taking Jeremy's face and starting to figure out where the line of his face is, and it's starting to cut that out of the image. Image by image, it's taking the video and breaking them down into pictures. As it then trims each one of those pictures, there's thousands and thousands and thousands of faces that are in the system. And so what it's doing is it's taking Jeremy, your face, and it's mapping them onto all of these thousands of people over and over and over again. And it's iterating and it's getting that line a little bit better each time. It's getting the lighting a little bit better each time. So the longer you have to train, the better these systems actually perform. So about 5 or 7 days, about 11, or in this case, about 1 million cycles of trying to train, and we get something like that. Not that difficult to do, not expensive. It's actually free if you have the right software, and we have laptops and different kinds of things that will run this software in order to make this happen.
Wow. Yeah. So, Hart, how do you actually spot a deep fake? Are there ways to identify one if I'm looking at video and I can, you know, be on the lookout for something to say, nope, I know that's not real?
Let's talk about what you can look for if you suspect you are viewing a deepfake. First, we'll have Hart look up. You can see that as he does so, the deepfake model warps to try to fit his face. You can also try to find where the deepfake blends with the actual footage of Hart. This is typically between the chin and the top of the neck. Next, we will have Hart look down. As he looks down at a more extreme angle, you can really start to see the deepfake warping as it tries to align with his face. Angles tend to be pretty difficult to match with current deepfake technology. You will also notice this as Hart turns his head around 90 degrees to his left. Let's try something a little different. We will have Hart put on a pair of glasses. As he puts them on, you can see the area around his eyes warp as the software deals with something obscuring his face. The deepfake is struggling to deal with the glasses. It is trying to place an eye over the lens even though we shouldn't be able to see his eyes currently. Deepfakes can struggle with reconstructing eyes in a believable manner. The last thing we'll have Hart do is put on a hat. Hats can be suspicious if you suspect you might be looking at a deepfake. This is because deepfakes don't replace a person's hair. If your hair doesn't perfectly match the person you were trying to fake, it can be more believable to add a hat or wig. Looking at Hart's cap, however, we can see that the deepfake is struggling to deal with the brim of the cap. You can see where it is attempting to blend much more noticeably. This is an issue that might be solved with different lighting or even choosing a different style of hat, such as a beanie. By now, you should have a pretty good idea of what to look for when you suspect a deepfake, but there are a couple of other things we should mention. Just as the deepfake doesn't replace hair, it also doesn't replace ears. That, of course, might require a bit more effort for you to compare, but it is worth noting. A deepfake also can't copy a person's body or mannerisms. The most believable deepfakes are performed by someone who looks close enough to the person they are trying to fake and can do a decent job of copying body language. This technology is improving all the time, but if you remain vigilant, you won't be fooled.
So, we saw a little bit on the video clip as to, shadows and kinds of areas where it may be blurring on the video itself. Now, that's important to recognize that there's limitations to how much the software will actually change an image. But then there's the second piece of this. And the second piece is, how do we receive that and how do we interpret that? And so here's some of the interesting elements of deepfakes today. One is, it's helpful if you know the other person or other people that you might be seeing. Meaning, is there cognitive dissonance? This is the questioning part of, should I question something that I don't believe is real? If I know that that person wouldn't say or do that, but I'm seeing it on camera, I need to question why I'm seeing this. They would never say or do that. Now, that requires that you know a little bit about the other person that you're looking at or the person that's being deepfaked. But cognitive dissonance, they would never say or do that, so let's question it. How are you viewing the media, right? And so most of us are viewing this media on our phones, let's say, and very small screens, and we're moving fast, kind of flipping through social media channels. So if you're not taking enough time to actually look at it, you're seeing it very quickly, it's on a small screen, you have a tendency to sort of believe that. It's harder to question it because you're not seeing some of the potential details. If it's low quality or hard to determine, it's important to question. So if it's at night and you're not really getting a good view, or there's lots of things happening in the background that's sort of distracting, it's really hard to determine if the details are present. So important to question. What's the setting? What does that look like? Now, there are lots of people. Is everybody sitting down? What is it? Is there only a few people? Lots of people? Again, night, daytime. How long is the clip? The longer the clip, the harder it is actually to carry on the deepfake process. It's easier for you to kind of see where the system itself breaks down. So a 10-second clip, as you're watching it on your phone in a small screen, again, really hard to sort of question unless you're paying attention. What type of day did it drop? Now, here's what's interesting about a lot of the deepfakes we're seeing right now is you'll see them actually drop or launch about 10:30, 11 o'clock at night. Why? Because a lot of us, unfortunately, are scrolling through, we're tired, it's late at night, our eyes are tired, and we're not questioning what we're seeing, and all of a sudden something sensational comes up and we have a tendency to believe it. Does it have a professional look? There are a few tools, some audio, video, photo sort of lookups to see if this is in fact real or not. Where did the original video come from? So that's just some of the things to think about on context. Like, how did you receive that information? Now, there's two other pieces to questioning. How do we know what's going on, or how do we start to question the deepfake process? The other is content. So is this being shared by a lot of people that are legitimate, right? That are corroborating each other's story? Yes, this in fact happened. Then you start to think through subject matter experts. Are subject matter experts referring to this, saying that this in fact actually did occur? And as you kind of go down the rest of the questions, again, it's a matter of, is this actually real? Are people endorsing this as being real or not? That's a technique that's long been used by a number of intelligence agencies and others around the world to kind of look at news through a very critical eye and say, okay, what are the factors that actually make this real versus factors that may in fact be wrong? The third element, which is the one that I get the most questions on, and they say, Hart, there's technology to create deepfakes. Like, we get it. We just saw it here in videos here, and it was really, really sort of believable. There has to be then technology that says this is a deepfake. So why don't I just turn that technology on, and then we don't have to worry about this problem anymore? Now, here's the challenge. It is possible, if you're doing an analytical process, to look at one video and try and determine what's the likelihood that it is deepfaked or not. But that's a process for one specific video that we have to go through. There's some tools that we start to look at, and we start to look at lighting and shading and shadows and elements that if somebody's not really paying attention to a deepfake, they're going to miss. And we're going to look at those kinds of elements. We'll look at the pixels around certain body shapes and others. Have those been altered in some way or cloned in some way? So we'll start to look through those, but it is a process. And because of that, there's not an easy way to scale that up, meaning somebody has to really pay attention to what's going on each individual video. When we start looking at thousands of videos, millions of videos and pictures and those kinds of things that are being pushed out, there is not the technology available yet that can scan very quickly lots and lots of different pieces and say what is deepfake and what is not. Hence, we have a technological problem, right? It's easy to actually do this, but we don't have a good technological solution at large scale. Now, there's some interesting tests being done right now, for example, on video calls like we're on here today. Now, one of the interesting ones is with Intel. So they're actually looking at, can they use, let's say, a webcam or a camera on your laptop or a computer, whatever it may be. And as you log into your computer, go into a meeting, the computer itself will actually scan your, let's say, shoulders and face. Now, what it's looking for at that point is blood flow. So in a deepfake, as you saw earlier, the deepfake is really just the face, right? And so you'll actually see blood flow in, let's say, the neck. That can be seen by a camera on a computer today. And then the computer says, okay, I see blood flow, I got it in the neck. Do I see blood flow in the face? And if it doesn't see blood flow in the face, then on a call like this today, it could, if it was in use on large scale, it give you an indicator that this person you're talking to may not in fact be the real person. But again, these are highly specific sort of tools that are not available yet on a large scale. So really the answer to this right now, to determine if something is a deepfake or not, comes down to the individuals that are actually viewing the content to make a good decision.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. And my guess is it's going to be very difficult to catch up with the current technology that's in place to be able to get that to the mainstream. So I think the best way, right? So what are the best ways to then identify deep fakes, right? I mean, there's some fundamental ways, right, Hart?
So there are some, right? And it's important to kind of start to put this into context of where we're headed over the next, let's say, few months. In the fact that what's happening on, let's say, the social media side, the large social media providers, the platforms, so to speak. Now, one of the things that they're starting to do to try and combat deepfakes, and it's a very interesting dynamic, is that here very soon, if you haven't seen that already, if you're uploading, let's say, a video, you're getting ready to put something on your social media accounts or channels, you're uploading a video, that there's an intent now to create a button for the person uploading to self-disclose that this is in fact a deep fake. And then it will be tagged as a deep fake on all of the social media channels as it's being shared around. But it requires this self-disclosure process. Now, for the platforms themselves, they're looking at that as, okay, that's the next best step, is self-disclosure. But there's no way we can do this at scale. And so if they self-disclose, we'll mark it. If they don't self-disclose, we're still going to let it go. And it's becoming harder and harder to convince many of the platforms to take content down.
Right.
Meaning, unless it violates some other policy, not a deepfake policy, but some other policy that they have in place, anti-violence policy or anti-discrimination policy or others, anti-disparagement policy, they in fact do not have an incentive to take the content down.
Right. Yeah. I mean, there's really no way for them or no intention to look retroactively at the deepfakes that are currently out there. And there's probably quite a few. Jeremy, maybe we transition briefly about kind of the insurance implications.
Yeah, and actually,
for
just
brokers and insurance on the room.
yeah, even quickly before that, Hart, interested in some of what you've said here. I've read up a bit on, you talked about software being developed that's going to be looking at blood flow, some facial movements. I've seen some stuff where there's some software where they're looking more at eyes, and if the eyes appear to have natural movement or kind of just a dead eye almost, and from the voice standpoint, is there actual evidence of a breath being taken, or is it kind of straight through sentence there? From your perspective, when do we see a webinar like this, whether it's WebEx, Teams, whatever platform you're utilizing, have software running in the background to start to try to catch up? Obviously, I think Spencer said it before too. We're playing catch up here, and is the protective, proactive side ever going to catch up to what's already out there in the wild?
I think it's a great question, and here's what's interesting about, let's say, again, video meetings like this, and where will we in fact be able to catch up? So there's been a number of forecasts already by a number of providers in the space. Let's say transcription providers, let's say avatar providers, even in a business context, that there is a consensus estimate that by the end of this year, by the end of 2024 in this case, that many of us may not actually have to be on a meeting in the same way we are today in person, meaning we will have our assistants, our avatars on a meeting. They will then grab a transcription of that meeting, and that transcription will then be provided to us. So in fact, we would train a bit of a model, we would train our own avatar, our assistants would actually have a conversation, or digital assistants would have a conversation, and then we would get the transcript of that conversation. I know that sounds a bit far out for potentially a lot of people, but the technology will allow for that now. So I think what you will end up seeing is an explosion of, digital avatars in meetings like this, digital assistants in meetings like this, grabbing transcriptions and sending it back to us. So even if we are able to get the technology up to a point that we can decipher very quickly on, let's say, a video call or something else, what is deepfaked and what is not, we're at the very same time, we're going to start leveraging more and more avatars, which again are going to make it more difficult. So there will be this ramping up process, at least for the next year or so, making this situation complex.
It's great info. That actually has me, questioning if we're actually speaking with Hart Brown right now, seeing the capabilities you all have already.
It is me. It's me.
Yeah, exactly right. I'm wondering exactly. Which one of us is the deep fake? No, we're all real. Jeremy, how about kind of the insurance and the risk management implications?
Yeah, I think a lot to think about here. As we've said, I mean, this is all new, but it's out there. Some good things to think about, I feel like, from a policy language standpoint. Loss of funds, we've talked about this Hong Kong incident, about $25 million lost there. Typically, loss of funds is going to be supplemented on a cyber policy. Higher limits can be achieved via crime policy, fiduciary policy there. But that's something that somebody's going to want to be cognizant of in terms of the limits, the language involving loss of funds. Fraudulent instruction, does the instruction for fraudulent instruction include or exclude deepfakes? Is there even any talk of that whatsoever? In terms of callbacks or out-of-band authentication, are there requirements in place for a callback. So out of band authentication is going to mean that you call somebody directly and utilize two methods to verify that the person who is asking you to change wiring instructions, change account terms, is the person that is saying that they are saying they are. From a data breach perspective, typically on a cyber policy, breach is required as a trigger for loss. The question is this satisfied by something stemming from a deepfake action? If things are kicked off via deepfake, was there a breach that kind of got things moving here? And then from an endorsement standpoint, actually just in the past week or so, have seen some primary carriers release endorsements clarifying affirmative coverage for losses stemming from a deepfake. I'm not going to give them free advertising and name them here, but that was something as we were kind of building this webinar, that the question of as far as when and how soon, where are you going to start to see those endorsements? And definitely seeing them out there. So we'll have to see if this kind of becomes something similar to the war exclusion, where you start to see a lot of new language being passed about and conflicting agreements and terms as far as how that's defined and covered.
I mean, I do have a lot of confidence in the cyber insurance marketplace. There are new threats and new risks, and I think we do a good job maturing the policy forms to cover these things.
Yeah. No, I think I think we're seeing, again, just with stuff coming out already about this, as we were kind of building our content for the webinar here, starting to see change within the industry and affirmative endorsements coming out for coverage there. So from a control standpoint, a lot of it is stuff that has been talked about in terms of good hygiene in place, widespread use of MFA to try to limit the impact of an intrusion. The callback techniques that we talked about for changes to financial transactions, user education, phishing, etc. Definitely really big when it comes to the help desk side of the house. And one other thing that probably needs to be thought about is that breach response side of things. From the breach response professionals, do they understand deepfakes? Do they understand how to respond to an incident? Are they going to be able to help scrub the data? Taylor Swift, with her legion of fans and attorneys, was able to act and get the internet scrubbed in about 17 hours. Do you have those same capabilities that she does? Probably not. But what do you have on retainer? Who do you have ready to help you respond? Do you have a PR response plan in place when it comes to deepfakes? Because that reputational damage, reputational harm, reputational loss, whatever it's called, on your specific policy, that's definitely going to be something you're going to want to be cognizant of. It is another thing from the insurance side of things, though, that definition of reputational damage, loss, harm, if that financial loss stems from a deepfake. So if it's a social media post, podcast, YouTube, wherever that's coming from, is your policy going to respond, or will court policies, if you're a carrier, will your policy respond if that financial loss, doesn't actually cause a breach, but just causes rep harm? Will that rep harm kick in there? So not looking to get into adjudicating any claim scenarios here, but if an employee is phished and installs ransomware, then you're gonna have a breach. But if there's something a bit different and it's just a rep harm loss, or just a transfer of funds, there's probably going to be some questions under current policy language there for sure. And flipping, I know you flip slides here, but flipping here to kind of insured implications. A lot of it's similar to what we talked about on that past slide, but making it more pertinent to the insureds listening on the call. From a security standpoint, what controls do you have around that password reset authentication? We heard the video, we heard the audio on Spencer's deepfake there and what they were able to do. What do you have? Do you have a callback procedure? Do you have any biometric processes to authenticate what's happening when you have a password reset coming across. Hopefully, there's more than just a verbal request, and you're checking that off, because that's this is all very possible and plausible at this point. From a reputation standpoint, social media team needs to be cognizant of what they're sharing, posting, putting on your website. There's the question of liability for sharing deepfakes, similar to sharing any music or media without somebody's consent. You got to be careful as far as what you're liking and participating in. If you have a social media team out there, if you have message boards, are those being monitored? Do you have that appropriate insurance coverage in place that it's going to cover any reputational damage or loss? And on the financial side, again, kind of similar to that IT help desk that we talked about. Got to make sure that you have really good controls in place on the accounting side. You want those callback procedures. Anytime that there's any transfer of funds taking place, if there's a change request from a third party side, you got to make sure that there's ways to authenticate that that's going about the right way.
Hart, do you want to add to that? How to anything to help protect yourself? I'm assuming additional training, continuous training. Anything you'd like to add there?
Just a couple of things I think is of interest, and I get these questions a lot. One, from a pure training perspective, it is beneficial to start adding that into your training component, whether it's on an annual basis or even just a spot piece of training, so people understand that deepfakes are in fact a potential concern or a risk throughout the organization, your organization. That goes all the way up from the employee group all the way to even at the board level, to understand that they may in fact be targeted and deepfaked, and understand what that potentially means for them, at least to give them a sense for the more exposure that they have in the world of audio video, that does create an opportunity for somebody to deepfake them. So important for everybody throughout the organization to know, in order to sort of combat some of the potential elements of impersonation attacks against the company. Now, the second element of the training, which I think is really interesting, is, and we use the Taylor Swift sort of example, is that mobilizing a lot of people can be beneficial to try and combat this idea of the vividness bias and the deepfake. Like, let's do something about it. If the employee population is trained and understand that these things can occur, can you then mobilize the employee base to actually all go out on social media if necessary and say, this is not real? So now you do have a bit of an option to say, okay, yes, there was a deepfake, but here's all of our employees recognizing that this is not in fact real, at least making an effort to manage that risk. And then I would certainly echo, Jeremy, your sentiments on whether it's a cyber incident response plan, a crisis management plan, both, how you're starting to think about adding that into your current list of threats and risks, and making sure you have some element of a response plan in place. I think that's just due diligence for everybody right now on the call.
Yeah, I think that the response plan, as well as from that accounting financial side, is it's very interesting, because even if you're doing the right things, and this was a story that I read here that was very, very pertinent and interesting. There's always the chance that again, bad actors are trying to stay one step ahead. Always a chance that you're still getting spoofed. But incident I read of an accountant receiving a voicemail from a customer instructing them to change payment details for a vendor of that customer, and saying, hey, change these vendors' payment details and go ahead and remit payment. The accounting firm did the right thing. They called the customer and said, hey, just making sure that we're wanting to change the payment terms for this vendor here, payment details. And the customer of the accounting firm relayed that, hey, we actually received a similar voicemail today as well from this vendor saying that they needed to change their payment details. So yeah, sounds like we're both on the same page. And the payment terms were changed, payment was set, and it was all sent off to a bad actor who'd actually played both sides of the table there and sent that sent the voicemail to both the accounting firm and the customer. And so in this case, the accounting firm was in the clear. They did the right thing. They're not going to be liable. It's unfortunately their customer who's going to have to eat that one because they didn't do the second check on their end with the vendor there.
Interesting. So brings us to our last slide, really just questions. I have two. Jeremy, why don't we go with you first? Certainly there's got to be a lot of laws coming out of this, and they're probably all very new, and they're probably coming from all different jurisdictions. Any sort of comment there?
Yeah, a lot of discussion right now. There's really nothing at the federal level that's gonna address deepfakes on the books right now. You have about 10 or so states, maybe a few more, that have various laws on the books that would be able to react in the case of inappropriate pictures that may be posted, similar to Taylor Swift incident that occurred. And some of those, may actually be deepfake specific, but a lot of them may get back to, an identity theft statute on the books that maybe could be turned to. Missouri, here at Safety National home office here in St. Louis, there's a Missouri's Taylor Swift Act is being debated right now, and that's possibly out there. Tennessee has one that they're discussing called the Elvis Act. They always do great with these acronyms, and that's looking at putting into place protection of personal rights for songwriters, performers, music industry professionals. Obviously, big in Nashville there for protecting them via the use of AI and as well as deepfake images. So a lot of stuff being talked about, but really more often than not right now, just like on the defense side of the house here, in terms of trying to react, you're coming from behind these threat actors. They're a step ahead here. The laws behind, you're looking at possible civil action. That's always going to be interesting. Hard. I'd love to hear, a bit more from your idea there in terms of what you think you could actually do from a civil side. Always tough to try to identify who created it and who are you suing, who are you going after. But from criminal side, there's not a lot, and so a lot of it's just going to be a reactionary. Let's try to get this stuff down. Let's try to recover as fast as possible. Let's make sure our reputation gets cleaned up as quick as we can.
Yeah, and the only thing I would add on that, which is it's a fascinating sort of dialogue that goes back and forth as it relates to deepfakes, and that is, and you're absolutely right, there's lots of sort of early stage, laws on the books or starting to be on the books. There's some for the electoral side as well, and some of them are really interesting. They say, if you're a candidate, you can't deepfake your opposing candidate 60 days before or after the election, like really, really specific, but they're trying to get things through the process. But one of the issues or questions on the table is what is creative license and what is in fact wrong or illegal? And most people now believe this is likely to go all the way to the Supreme Court at some point to say, if there's not, let's say, a monetary loss against the person that was deepfaked, and they're just doing something in the creative domain and put it out on social or whatever it may be, is that still appropriate? Is that still protected as just creative license? Now, it's a really interesting dynamic, and we don't know the answer to that yet, but there are people that say, you know what, this should in fact be okay, provided there's not a monetary loss or some other loss to the individual that was in fact deepfaked. So there's a handful of things starting to play out that are interesting. The other piece that I think is interesting just to put out right now for this audience to consider is what happens in a courtroom today. Now, video-based evidence is considered almost something that is, fact in current legal processes. It is something that juries have a tendency to gravitate to and believe more than anything else. Now, the next question is, with all of this deepfake technology, what happens to the process within the courtroom itself? Who's there to certify, in fact, that a video is in fact real and not deepfake? How do we start to decipher that? Again, not that there's a good answer today, but there are a lot of people trying to work on that question now as well.
Yeah, that is very interesting. So I think we got time for maybe one more question, and this is certainly not an advertisement for you, Hart, but one of the questions is, how does Future Point of View, how are you helping companies in the deepfake space and the AI space specifically?
So it's a great question. The AI space is a broad-based, looking at risk, governance, how does that work? What needs to be put into place? What committees, what charters, what people need to be put in right seats? How does this look? We're early days in overall AI, and so creating a principles-based approach on how you govern the AI tools you use within organizations becomes really, really important to take advantage of the positives and avoid the potential negatives of the use of these technologies. Now, as it relates to deepfake technologies, the questions that keep coming to us now are things related to brand takeover. So reputational related issues, but some of these get really, really complex. And so they want us to actually do exercises with their leadership team where we bring in a scenario where we in fact take over their brand for a short period of time. Publicly traded companies right before, right after sort of quarterly earnings reports can be quite problematic. Like you can really start to pinpoint how things can start to go in a negative direction, nonprofits being another one, where the brand itself is in fact taken over for a short period of time. So not only creating the plans, but then exercising on those plans with the leadership team as well.
It's wonderful. Well, I think that's all the time we have. So certainly, Jeremy, thank you very much for your time and putting a lot of this together. Hart, it's wonderful to see you, and thank you for bringing your perspective. We'll answer any additional questions that have been submitted to us in email in the next couple of days. Well, don't hesitate to reach out to us here at Safety National. Thanks all, and have a great rest of your afternoon or your evening. Thank you.